Welcome to the Nurture Pod. My name is Iris Sullivan Dare, and I'm here with beautiful Ginger Edwards as per usual. And the Nurture Pod is that edge zone, that place between what is, the riparian zone between what is and what's possible. And we're really we get into discussions about nurture culture, which is that kind of web of care and interdependence that is what holds our world together, that is often overlooked or in the blind spot of Western modern culture.
Yeah, well said. Hi, Iris.
Hi, sweetie pea.
Well, I just want to say congratulations on an entire year of the Nurture Pod because we just hit our 1 year mark. We started on the spring equinox in 2024, and this is the week of the spring equinox. So it's like our final show of season 1, I guess, as you could say, which of course we're making all this up, but I think it's kind of cool. I definitely run my life by equinoxes and solstices and not by other dates. So the equinox feels like coming back into a place of balance. So I don't know. I thought it'd be fun. We just kind of maybe do a little, what has nurtured you about the last year of doing this podcast?
So much. I think that it's been very, there's a lot in my life that feels higher pressure than the podcast does. And in a really good way, because I feel like what the podcast has been nurturing for me is to encourage me to think more deeply, and also to be able to have these amazing conversations, which you don't really have in the grocery store. And so at all, and being able to be connected with you, my friend, is really great because like we live a little more than an hour apart, and life is really busy, and we've had how many podcasts have we done in this year? Like average like 30?
35, I think. Maybe this is the 35th one that we're posting.
Yeah, like there's no way we would have traveled to see each other 35 times
and talked for an hour.
and talked for an hour.
Nope,
So like it's been a great privilege to get to listen to what's in your brilliant brain. That's been really great.
Yeah, right back at you. I feel like it's been really fun. It's a weird outlet. I don't know that I really understood that I really needed, but it was my birthday, little trip that we were on, and we were talking about it. And ever since we started it, yeah, it's scratched some itch, right? It's just like, I want to have space in my life to think deeper about things, to think about the bigger picture around things. Sagittarius with Aquarius rising. I mean, I love thinking and talking about stuff. It's the way I understand things is by, and I know you're a good old Gemini. So like we understand by talking and passing the baton back and forth. Like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? But it really helps to me. It's like I'm a mindset coach, but I feel like I've been coached. After I get off these podcasts, I feel like I coached myself and you coached me and I coached you. And it's like just through the conversation, which of course is a very human thing, is how we learn and challenge ourselves, is by in these conversational ways we have with other humans. And yet I live by myself. I don't, and like you said, these kind of deep conversations don't just pop up in the culture. We don't actually have a lot of spaces for them. We don't live in a place where there's a salon we can go stroll down to and drink wine and chat with other intellectuals. That's not happening in America. It'd be lovely, but like the podcast is a nice, form because you're really focused, but it's also relaxed and really open form, that we've always made it so it's just a conversation between us. It goes all kinds of weird ways. I mean, maybe to its detriment we ramble on, but I sometimes feel like there's brilliance in those rambles. Like we get to a place where like, oh, there it is. And maybe we wouldn't have gotten there if we hadn't like gone off trail a little bit and taken the the
Oh,
outer rim walk, and then we see the thing from a different angle and we're like, oh wait, that's really
I
cool.
think that's I mean, when you look at like co-op, and like I've spent a lot of time looking at how groups make decisions, right?
Mm.
Like slight obsession. Probably that's slight. It's not slight.
Major
For
obsession.
decades I've been super interested in how do people make decisions together. And many of the models show this huge kind of no man's land that you have to wade through in order to
Right.
get at the brilliance that's in the room.
Hmm.
And like this idea of these very linear meetings that make people really mad when the meetings aren't linear. And it's like if you just like chill and let that
Hmm.
messiness happen, suddenly it's all like the coming to agreement is like 50 times easier than if
Mm.
you try to
Yeah.
like ram through agreement by doing it in this really linear if you don't allow room for that fermentation to happen,
Yeah. And
you
it's really
know.
nurturing. It's nurturing to a part of our soul to have a little bit of time to ramble, like the corporate kind of work day is so compressed and everything, it's like a paid by the hour, time is money, efficiency. It's been shoved down our throats since birth, that the idea of just having conversations that kind of ramble around is like, I mean, it's like an affront to capitalism in a lot of ways. And a lot of
Yeah.
people's minds are like, I'm not getting paid to sit here and listen to you think this out. But it's essentially human, right? You think of like indigenous councils sitting for months, talking and talking and, receiving prophecies and signs and, going off on vision quests and coming back. I mean, this was not a rushed thing because, I think nurture culture is slower. It's just a slow
Yes.
ramble. And I think that's where our nervous systems really relax. And that does allow like this spark of genius to come forth when we are kind of letting ourselves just, yeah. And I think that it relaxes me. Like oftentimes I'll get on this call with you and I'm like, oh, I gotta do the podcast. Like with that energy, I'm tired. I've done a day.
Yeah.
We usually record these in the evening. And then always I'm rejuvenated by the end. I'm like, oh, that was fun. And I have more energy and I feel like I just got a massage in my brain or something. Like it just like it wasn't about staying focused and,
Uh,
you
uh, uh.
know, selling a product or making a point or, teaching something. It was just a space where we could, yeah, play. We're playing in a way, playing with ideas and with a good friend. So it's
Yeah.
really rejuvenating. Hopefully that's what people are receiving when they listen to us.
I I definitely so last week we were talking about orphan crushers versus slime mold, and I
That's
said I
right.
was going to make you a t-shirt. I think they need to be patches
Oh, patches would be good. Yeah.
or stickers.
I mean, I'm open to all those. I think that I envision myself traveling with patches on my backpack though. So maybe a patch would be cool.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on it. And not that, well, I am on it eventually. I'm usually on it and it
You're
takes
on it
me
on a psychic level. It's
on the
on the,
psychic level,
yes.
yeah,
The note has
but
been taken psychically.
yeah,
It's in the
totally.
astral plane. So at some point, maybe that will manifest. Yeah. So just congratulations. It's been a big
High five to us.
high
Good
five to
job.
you. And high five to all you listeners who are downloading and sharing it and watching us on YouTube and, you know, checking it out. It's really cool to hear our feedback. I mean, please comment to us. It gives us a lot of inspiration to hear your feedback and to rate and review, of course. Apple Podcast seems to be where everybody's finding this the most. So, but it's also on my website. And it's on YouTube too, if you want to see us actually talking, just so you know. There's lots of ways you can watch it, but we appreciate it. It's really cool. Another thing you think about is like how many times would you have 1,000 people, sit down and you
Yes,
talk to them for an hour? Like that is I mean, we're talking to each other, but we're also talking to a
the
lot of other
listeners.
people at the same
Yeah.
time, which is really amazing to have these kind of deep ranging conversations in America about nurture culture at that level is really cool. And
Yeah,
I think a
totally.
little revolutionary.
Yeah, yeah, I've been thinking about the I don't have a good word for it, but like the micro revolutionary acts
Mm-hmm.
that how like this is one and there's more. And it's like,
Yes.
like driving to work this morning and seeing, the little tiny roadside size libraries that people make, the little micro
I
libraries in
love those.
neighborhoods,
I
and
love
like
those.
and just feeling like right on. And
Hmm.
there's a miniature food bank in my neighborhood that one of the
Yeah.
neighbors has, that, and they're like, there's just action there all the time. People dropping stuff off, people picking stuff up. It's like,
It's so cool.
and yeah, there's no, it's totally an anarchist
Hmm.
thing. Like nobody's like, there's no meetings about it. It's just in
Right.
some front of somebody's house, and it just is feeding people.
Yeah, I know. There's two. There's one in Nehalem. There's one in Manzanita. It's so cool. I've stuck so many things in there. I'm getting ready to move, so I'm going through my pantry all the time and like pulling out canned goods. Like, I could put these in the little free pantry, and it's fun. It's like a little, I don't know, magical fairy house. You open it up and you
Yeah,
put your little
totally.
things in there. I
You're
don't know.
like,
It
oh,
feels very cool. Like I prefer it to a food pantry in a way because I have this more magic. It has a more magical energy around. It's painted, cute. And yeah, there's no organization around it. It's just like this weird little box on a post. You're like, I guess somebody will come here and take this and need it. So it'd be great. Someone will drink this tea that I'm leaving. All right. So, Iris, are you a genius or what? You wanted to talk about genius.
I was,
I believe you're a genius.
oh, thank you.
And now, I thought you were going to be like, no, I'm not, because there's no such.
Oh, no, I kind of think I am, but, um, dude,
I
what
do
can I
too.
say?
I'm
Like
not
it's you,
disagreeing.
I mean, I don't know, but, um,
I think we all are.
I'm done. I don't know. Anyway, we won't have to go down that dark alley, but, yesterday I had a really great conversation
Mm,
with one of the teachers at one of the after school programs that I'm in, and talking about the genius of children, and having this, we had a fantastic conversation. And one of there was somebody had made some cake, so I got to eat a piece of cake,
always a
which
bonus.
does connect it to me, because
Okay.
it became, on the drive home afterwards, everything was kind of rattling around in my head from this brilliant conversation. And suddenly I realized that forming collaborative groups is like, it's like a recipe for cake,
Mm,
which feels to me like I it feels really brilliant actually, but it also feels like it's like from the ether more than like I like toiled over this brilliant idea.
okay. So break it down. What do you mean?
Break it down. So, if you look at the world, we've talked about this before, like I think like a lot of temperament ideas around temperament break it into like four kind of big broad groups of temperament, like how people arrive when they're born.
Mm,
People tend to have kind of some traits, and so you can kind of like divide it into like infinite like tiny variations, but you can kind of break it down into like four kind of main big groups. And so when we did temperament tests in the worker co-op, we named them after the four elements because it made sense because of other things that we were thinking about. So like the earth temperament is almost half of the population,
mm,
and they're tradition keepers. They're kind of like the salt of the earth, and they want to be working about as hard as the people around them are working. And
mm-hmm,
so they're very concerned about that, and they're super essential. It totally makes sense to me that that's half the population.
mm-hmm,
And in times like that we're living in, when so many of like the things that tell us who we are have been upended, it's
mm-hmm,
really stressful. So I just like think about that. It's like when you're going through the grocery store, uh, almost half the people you see are under a lot of stress this lifetime,
right.
because everything is up for renegotiating, and that is a very uncomfortable place.
Mm,
And so, but like when you look at human history, thank God that there are people that are like, this is what we learned the hard way. this is why we do it this way. Like it's a brilliant thing for the community to have that steady earth temperament.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the fire temperament, and they're like gung ho, right? They're like go, 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 go. And so like, and that's about 35% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, get it done. They're very immediate. They're really good in the present moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if the earth temperament's kind of past, and then the fire is like tending the fires right now. Like so they're really good in the here and now, and they're really good at like inspiring, but also can be, everything's got a shadow side too, right?
Yeah.
And
We're
so
not very patient. That's what
not very patient, yeah. And could be, there's that Mars energy, right? Might
we
be a
could be
little
very aggressive. Yes.
very aggressive.
I
And
just want to point out, so I'm not going to, don't break your flow too hard,
okay.
but that you're kind of doing the 4 elements thing that we did in
Oh,
our
oh,
first
oh,
episode a
oh.
year ago, which I think is pretty
Ah,
cool. Like you're
oh, nice.
echoing. We did
Oh,
the four
nice.
elements in 2024, our first episode, and here you are just doing it. So keep going. This
Which
is
I
cool.
want, it was what I was thinking about yesterday, is this whole thing.
Yeah,
So,
good.
so
So you had earth and fire.
earth and fire. And then there's the smallest are the air people. And they are kind of like all time. And they're like only like 7% of the population, maybe 10, but probably not. And they're really good big picture holders. Also really good at kind of figuring out, so like figuring out how different things, it's like they're the ones that are going to be like, oh my gosh, right? Like and kind of, can be um a little brusque or impatient, usually really smart. And that's not always really smart, like emotional intelligence, but sometimes. And that's like that's like so valuable in the community when they are combining that big picture with high emotional intelligence. It's priceless, right? And they're really able to see things in a way that have perspective, and to be able to see things in a way that often is just in the blind spot of everybody else. And so they're really um their shadow side is they can have a over abundance of certainty of their own rightness, because it's very left brain. It's a very left brain temperament.
Okay.
And then the fourth one, of course, is water. They're the nurturers, and they're kind of future thinking. So think about the river running to the sea. And they're only, 10 to 15% of the population. But that's probably where most of the natural cooperators are. And they're the ones that are like organizing. There's the higher, that like the predisposition for just kind of like emotional intelligence is more easily accessible to that temperament.
Yep.
Very motivated by inclusiveness and trying to include everyone. And really, dark side can be like maudlin. you
Yeah.
know and so so I'm not saying like there's it's but the real thing is, if you think of the temperaments like cake ingredients, in a cake you need salt. It doesn't taste very good if there's no salt in there, but you don't need a lot of salt. You don't need a cup of salt. You need a teaspoon of salt, right? And so that's like, I feel like the air temperament. So if there's a collaboration, depending on what the goal of the activity is, whether it's a workplace or if it's like, an activist circle, it's like you need to be like, sometimes it's hard to really see the roles that you need. And our society has a lot of blind spots, and sometimes like it can be back to those like linear meetings instead of like more open meetings. Like if you don't value the nurturing space, and you're just like, we just need it to be really efficient, then you might, it's like, my grandma used to have this little sign in her kitchen that said, the hurrier I go, the behinder I get. And and I think it can really happen like that. If you try to cut corners and try to do things without including the nurturing aspect of things and making sure that it's like, if you have a meeting, you should feed people. If you
Mm,
have, people get along better if they've just eaten.
mhm,
Like,
mhm.
if you're gonna, like, there's all these things that seem
Right.
fluffy but actually make people more effective at
Yeah.
collaborating and working together. And so I think that the different temperaments are like the cake ingredients. And so it's like, if you have,
Mhm.
like the nurture people, they're great. But if you have too many of them,
Right. Yeah.
then it's like having too much sugar, and it's gonna like
Yeah.
flow the pan, right? And if you
Yeah.
have
Then you're
too
just
much,
having a potluck and there's nothing gonna get done.
right. And then if you have too many fire people, it's like adding too much baking soda, and it's
Yeah.
just gonna again go all over the place and taste terrible. And if you
Mhm.
if you
Just burn it.
and if you right. Yeah, all the things. And so like with like and then
Fire
the
people will be like, we can just cook this faster if we cook it at 600 degrees.
and then it
And
doesn't
that's
work.
not
It's
how that
gooey
works.
in the middle and burn on the outside. So my thought as I
So
was
how does this,
driving,
okay, wait, how does
yeah,
this relate to astrology? Are you bringing astrology into this, or is this just like,
no.
okay, okay, doesn't relate at
So
all. Okay.
so
So go ahead. Sorry. What was your
so the
thought? I interrupted you.
so the teacher was talking about this project that the children had been doing in school, which is involving this elaborate role play that they're designing themselves.
Mm,
And so they've been exploring American history. And so they were role playing being immigrants, and they've been role playing the American Revolution. And so they've been having all these meetings, and it's like all of the personalities, because temperament, we show up, and in children it's
mhm,
really like pretty clear a lot of the time.
mhm,
And so like, seeing like these little pods of kids who are like, let's just make our business is this magic kale soup, and that just makes people, it heals people. And then over here, it's like, our business is making chicken coops, and people are like, we don't have any chickens, we don't need one. And they're like, you have to buy a chicken coop, like, and so like they've got their whole thing
Gonna
going
work on
on.
their marketing department.
Yes, totally. And and she said one of the parents asked, "Is this going Lord of the Flies, or is this going like those darling children that whose plane crashed in the Amazon and kept each other alive?" And it's like it could go either way.
Go either way.
And so, and it's like, which is any human endeavor can kind of go
Mhm,
either way, right? And it's
right.
like, which brought me to who's in the room. And I'm like, and we kind of talked a little bit about the temperaments. And she's like, there's the one, we have one, it's pretty small. And she's like, there's one very air temperament person who is like, do, he can see it all. And he was absent. He's like, everything was different because that kid wasn't there.
Mm,
And even though
for
he's
sure.
not like a big push forward leader guy, he is like this, and like,
Mhm,
which is was like, oh, anyway, and just realizing how important it is to have the right formula
mm,
for a group to work together. And
mm,
yeah, and so just the last thing is like that, the skipping stone from thinking about that, how do you have an effective, joyful group that can do awesome things?
mhm.
It made me think about like when you look at art history, or if you look at actually not just art, lots of things. I really don't think there's any individual, truly, truly individual genius, like,
Oh, that's where this came from. That's where we started
yes,
the genius thing.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yep.
So like there's because it's invariably they have somebody that they're having really great conversations with,
Mhm,
or a lot of times it's their lover or their partner who
mhm.
doesn't get any credit but actually was like super impactful, or
Yep.
they're part of a greater social scene, like surrealism and modern art really was in this hotbed of like scientists and artists and musicians all hanging out together in Vienna,
Mm-hmm.
so like there's I just when you if you like dig just a little bit, you see
Yeah.
that people or and most people have been in a class at some point in their life that just was magic.
Mm-hmm.
It's like spontaneously they had the right ingredients for that cake, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I am on fire for is to think about how do you, if you want to do something, and we need to be working together in these times more than any
Mm-hmm.
other,
Mm-hmm.
how do we make it less random? How do we help people to identify on a like basically on a temperament level
Mm-hmm.
what are the skill sets that we need and how do we see that clearly so that we
Yeah.
can draw in like how do you form a board, how if you're doing
Mm-hmm.
something that formal, but
Right,
also
right.
like yeah, it's that I'll stop now because that was like a lot.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. I mean, it is an interesting concept. I think a couple things that occurred to me when you said a couple parts of that was that, yeah, I agree that the whole idea of individual genius is kind of a myth, right? I mean, there's certainly people who are brilliant, and maybe that is that 5% or whatever, that they have the ability to kind of either coalesce the gestalt that they're in, like into like this, one like really powerful piece of art or writing, or they're the spokesperson for the thing, and they their voice rises because they have like the perfect, like, I'm thinking of Martin Luther King Jr., somebody like that who yeah, I mean, he didn't stand alone. There was obviously a huge civil rights movement that he was a part of and born from, and lots of activists, and yet he was able to find within his own like spirit the words that kind of was the spokes you know person for like a movement, and they needed that, like, that they need that kind of spiritual leadership energy. And yet what's also interesting to me is I've been studying Peruvian shamanism. Randomly, I'll just go throw in the Peruvian shamanism that I've been learning about, because I'm tending to go to Peru, and I'm signed up for a course, and it's really interesting because part of their cosmology, which is thousands of years old, very clearly says that the next, like the era that we're in is not going to be an era of individual leaders.
Mm,
Even if they are like, in the past, yes, there were these, big, powerful kings in the Inca Empire, and like, figures that would come and create these, really embody the people and push them into these great heights and all these things. And they're like, this time it isn't. It's like that energy is going to be dispersed into every single person. And so it is going to be a revolution, but it will not be a revolution of leaders. It'll be a revolution of everyone having a little piece of it that comes together and does the kind of spiritual consciousness uplift that's needed for these times, which I thought was super fascinating, because as our whole conversation about nurture culture, I think that's what we've always been tapping into, that this is a revolution, or a, let's say, not even a revolution, but like of a spiritual shift, a consciousness shift of what we value and how it looks, because it's not going to look like we have been taught in the culture of the hero's journey, right? Because this one person's going to step up and everyone's going to be like, oh my God, you're here, you rescued us. I mean, think of all the superheroes and things that
yeah,
we
yeah,
have
yeah.
lifted up in the mythos of America and in the West in general. Geniuses, people who are just brilliant, who save us all. And that's not that's I think that when I read that in the Peruvian stuff, I was like, wow, that really resonates with how I've been feeling with about the nurture culture stuff, that it is a genius on a different way. Like, we have the genius of ourselves, like our own little part that we bring, and that part is extremely essential. Like you said, it's an ingredient that is needed. The key, I
Yes,
think, is to understand yourself and to understand your ingredient and not try to be a different ingredient, right? Like,
yes,
yeah, like, so
yes.
we've been trained to kind of all be, in one way. And I think what the culture hasn't allowed people to do is to fully express who they really are and how they want to express it. And therein your natural temperament, which maybe has been not as valued in patriarchy, or, the capitalism and all the climb and push and, you know, compete, survival of the fittest. And we talked about survival of the nurtured, which is what actually will get us through, is
Yeah.
what we nurture in ourselves and in collaboration with others. Like what we see in each other that isn't like what we want them to be for us, but if we can recognize like their true gift and somehow
Yes.
create openings where there's space for that true gift to be seen and to emerge, because it's almost like an encouragement. It's like, oh, please bring it. Like, please come forward out of hiding. We know your whole life you've been told this was stupid or wrong, or that, that's imaginary or too emotional. Or, I mean, think of all the messages we get,
All, yeah.
unless you're coming to a business meeting with a very certain intellectual rationale. I mean, even the emotional stuff. I mean, they're real basic, like baking cookies and stuff. It's like the devaluing of all of these other parts that really not only serve the group, but is like an actual expression of how this person's gift wants to serve the collective. Like, and there's genius in that, because
Yes.
you're right. Like the food does things that I don't care how many, how great your whatever slideshow is, like, the person who brings
Yeah.
the food is really playing a huge essential role of bringing people together and nourishing. And because it is associated with the female, the feminine, most of the nurturing things that happen have been very, very devalued in like a male dominated culture. And I think that for me is the biggest pivot. If we talk about nurture culture, survival of the nurtured pivots the whole conversation in a different direction. Because if
Yes.
survival of the fittest, it's like it absolutely would lead you, well, in order to survive, then I have to be the strongest. I have to compete. I have to be like really aware of who else is in competition with me, who else could kill. Like, think of the whole way survival of the fittest sets you up to be in the world. And then you can see our culture emerge from that. And really, like, it is like, even when you get $250 billion, it's still not enough, right?
Never
There's
enough.
still like, there's like other, things that are going to come for this. And I've got to be bigger and stronger and like even more and more, take up more and more and more, because that's the game we're playing. It's survival of who can get the most, who can dominate the space, who will, control everything. When in actual reality, that's not true. That's not how nature works. Really, you don't even get to that point unless you're nurtured. Like, you don't even get to the point where you can be competing for food or resources if you're not, as a very small baby, like was nurtured by your little
Yes.
community of your mother and your father, and then your community, and then the earth herself, which is giving you food,
So
water,
much.
shelter, right? So all of these acknowledgments of how we're nurtured, but that part is completely, like you said, made invisible in the culture. It's like it's not valued, so it's not talked about. Doesn't mean it's not there. It is, but it's just been like, oh, well, that doesn't matter. What
It,
matters is when you get to the playing field and now you're competing for resources.
and it's like the misconception that something that is intangible and hard to pin down is worthless, not that it's what it actually is it's priceless. It's
Yeah, it's
priceless because it's so valuable that there's no there it cannot be it cannot be
yeah,
a true commodity
yeah,
because it's
you would not
essential.
survive without it. Like, it's an
Yes.
essential need. Like, we cannot survive without being nurtured and loved as children, as individuals. It just,
And
survival
so
of the
there's I
fittest is not how we roll. Not really.
no,
It doesn't even make
no.
sense. That's not how nature works. I mean, nature is also a game of survival of the nurtured, and and more and more and more as we understand it, survival of cooperation and how systems interact and work and help each other and support each other. And we've taken that lens and we put it on the earth too. So if like we dominate this system, we are like put our species as survival of the fittest. Like, we will, be in control of the resources. We'll be in control of the ocean. We'll be in control, we'll make sure that we're the top predator
Such
in
hubris.
all ecosystems, which completely, again, devalues and ignores the fact that we're completely supported by all of these ecosystems that we're dominating and destroying, thus destroying ourselves. So it's obviously wrong-headed because you can see where it goes, right? It goes to
Yes.
self-destruction, which is not survival. It's actually inherently like suicidal. So I think, I know I took your cake thing and I just ran a different direction, but I'm inspired by it because I do think it's saying the same thing. Like we have to really change the lens on how we are looking at this entire game that we're playing. And I think when we say, okay, we want to make a cake, that which means we want to create a sustainable group, a group that is really amazing together, that can, do some kind of project or change or creative act or whatever we're trying to do, even a family unit, I guess, school.
Yeah.
Like, I think what you're saying is like, yeah, like look at the ingredients first. Like, what do we have?
Yes. And that's like, so
And
we
then what can we
making,
make, right? Like
yes,
what can
yes,
these ingredients make? Not if it's almost like remove the cake. It's like, what do we got? And so,
yes,
and I've thought about that too. Like if we started with, oh, I don't know, the Colorado River, the Nehalem River, we're like, okay, that's what's there.
right.
Now, how do we live in support of that? How do we live to offer that river the best, health, vibrancy, so then we can be supported by it?
And, and I think that we have to involve the land because when, when you try to like, um, and you're only looking at it with an extractive lens,
Right.
then there's just no, it's like the only answer is how do we get more? The answer is not how do we, because I feel like if the survival of the nurtured, it's really how can we do it with less? Like
Yeah.
how can we, it's like if it all works when everybody takes what they need, then excess is a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because and so but the other side of it, survival of the fittest is it totally feeds this idea of more, more, more.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so because I'm working with these raw recruits of humans, these very young humans, I it's really interesting um to see like the kids who are emotionally resourced and how much more resilient they are, how
Mm-hmm.
much more patient they are, how
Mm-hmm.
much they're not, like I'm handing stuff out and some kids cannot help themselves but to grab the piece of paper I just handed to the person next to them because they can't help it. They can't help it
Yeah.
because they can't trust that I'm actually going to hand them one next.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, it's like I am telling kids over and over and over again, everyone's going to get one. There's enough. You can, like
Yeah.
it's like, some of those kids need that reassurance over and over and over and
Yeah.
over again because their life experience has not provided that. And
Right.
so this month they have to work together in the schools program. They have to work together in partners and they have to help each other.
Mm.
And so I realized the first couple classes, I'm like, oh, I need to give them very specific, what does it look like to work together
Yeah.
and give them some ideas. And then I've been like trying to observe them and seeing how they're working together and then add that to like the list of and asking them like, how else could you help each other? And I can just see it's like a bell curve of the kids having more fun with the
Mm-hmm.
project instead of like
Yeah.
the first two groups. Oh my Lord, they were just like bickering the whole time. And like, it's like we ran,
Mm.
running out of time because they couldn't work together because they were caught. And it's like, oh, it's a skill.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Cooperation is just like, I mean, obviously, I've thought not like the first time I thought of it, like really cooperation are
It's a
skills.
skill that's not modeled. I mean, that's the other thing, is that we don't live in a culture that models it, right? So we have to teach it. And it's also not taught. I mean, school's very competitive, the general rule, you know?
And even when they have group projects, they just say work, as though it's just spontaneously going to
Yeah.
happen. And I was doing that too. Like I was just expecting that they would work together. It's like, here's your partner. This is,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh no, it's like, but if you give them just like some few guidelines, here's a way that you can help your partner. Then they're
Yeah.
like, oh, they have something I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, when I was in Japan, I saw a culture that has a very different ethos around collective action and collective behavior, right? So in Japan, their crime rate is basically nothing because basically it's taboo in that culture to do something wrong. Like they don't do it because not because they're going to be punished, although they probably would be. It's because they just don't do it. Like it's a shameful thing, you know, and so they wouldn't bring shame on themselves or their family or, you know, the culture itself by doing that. The most extreme examples, we were there on Halloween night and there was this raging, I mean, they like to party. The Japanese people throw down. There was this raging street party going on. I mean, it was just like 2 a.m. Everyone was in costumes. Everyone was drunk. It was Osaka, which is a big college town. So think like major universities, and these kids are raging, like blaring music. And me and Brigham were out in the street, and you know, they have like alcohol because they like to drink. Like these big supermarkets, these huge like level supermarkets that go into the sky, and on the street, all these kids in costumes, so you couldn't even tell who they were, you know, drunk. They have like alcohol, like bottles of whiskey, like cans of beer, like all just on the street in displays for purchase. And people were going, and I'm sorry, in America, in a situation where a bunch of drunk college kids costumes, if you put alcohol onto the street in front of your store, it would take like 5 seconds for that all to be stolen and gone, right? Like,
Yes.
no way. Like, because they had no security, no one was watching it. It was just sitting out there. Like, even I was tempted. I mean, I didn't even need it. I was like, God, there's like a bottle of whiskey. Like, we should just, but nobody was. And people would take the alcohol and they'd have to go into the store like 2 levels up, like to pay for it. And they
And
would.
they were
Like,
doing that.
oh yeah, nobody stole anything. It was not a problem. Now, and I was just like, my mind as an American is just kind of blown by that. You know, you're like, wow.
So it's
There was
not human
also,
nature.
and you
Like
have
to
all, it's not, yeah. So it's really like you look at culture and you realize this is not done in their culture, you know. And we were there in 2019, late like December 2019, and that was right before COVID, right? And they all wore masks anyway. Like they had the masks on, you know, maybe 50% of them would be wearing a mask in the subway or train, because in their culture, that's if they're sick, like they have a cold, they don't want to get anybody else sick. That's like a big taboo, like because the collective is the important thing. Their individual discomfort is not important. It's important that they don't take the shame on of making somebody else sick if they know that they are not feeling well. So they all wore
yes.
masks. And I remember coming back to America and COVID, I'm like, oh, Japan's going to be fine, right? Because they have this ingrained, like we, as a rule, will wear masks and protect each other. And America, I was like, America's going to be a shit show, which of course it was, because the idea that you would have to do something as an individual to protect the collective was like inherently against Americanism, right? Like we don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me I have to wear that. Like, blah, blah. Why don't you take better? I mean, all the rhetoric that came out,
Yes.
and it was just revealed a huge part of what maybe was invisible to a lot of people before, was that we have been trained that, you know, we can do whatever, that, yeah, it's survival of the fittest. That is,
Yes.
it's an underpinning of capitalism. Like it's deeply woven into the culture. And so when you say, no, this is survival of the collective, yeah, you put that into America and people are like, no, not real. No, I don't think so. Like now all of a sudden it's survival of the collective. Like it's been survival of the fittest this whole time. And that's what we'll do. It's
It's like
very
when
interesting.
it's like when so tiny little babies wear diapers mostly in our society and our culture. And then when they become toddlers and they're undergoing an evolution of understanding that they are an I, very at that exact moment, we start potty training kids and tell them what you've been doing is wrong. Now you have to do it this way. And so like when people when like traditional potty training is like super fraught,
Mm,
right? Because it's like what you've been doing is wrong. Now you have to do it this way. And this is wrong
mm,
and bad. And isn't that exactly what we were It's like, no wonder why people are pissed off. It's like, you have to survive on your own.
Yeah.
You're survive, like it's
Yeah.
about you. And then it's all of a sudden you're like, oh,
All the
actually,
messaging from America is like, oh, you get shot in your schoolroom. Like, well, that's the you problem. That's not us. As a country, we're all going to have guns. So you make sure that, like you could take care, you defend yourself, blah, blah, blah. That is the messaging. So like,
yes,
yeah. So to try to turn it around I think a lot of what we're seeing going on is still unraveling from COVID. I really think that what happened was you took an extreme like capitalistic, materialistic, individualistic society, and then you introduced a pandemic, which we'll probably see again with climate change. I mean, this is going to be shock after shock, but like you introduced a shock of collectivism,
yes.
and it didn't go well.
And
It went
it's
very,
like,
very, very poorly, and people are still angry about it to the point where you still see the rhetoric. Like, you see immigrant, people being arrested and stuff who have completely legal right to be in the country, all their paperwork's good, like, and people are still like, no, well, he must be, they all, there's like, it's up to him to figure that out. Like, it's not our problem. Like, if you get arrested, there must be something illegal you're doing. You must be a terrorist. It's always, and like and there's other people who are like, but collectively, this is a really bad thing because if it happens to one person,
it can
it can
happen to
happen to
everybody.
anyone. It's a precedent. Like, we have to look at that. And you still have this like individual, like, well, it's not going to happen to me because I'm not breaking any laws. Right. And there's like this protectivism around you, like, and mentally, like, no, it's all everyone for themselves. And I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen to me until, of course,
Well,
it happens to
because
you.
because
It's a dangerous mindset, is what I'm saying. Like, the collective
yes,
mindset is much healthier because we are survival of the nurtured. Like, when we nurture each other, we become more safe. When we are
yes,
survival of the fittest, we are more and more vulnerable. And it's a lie, right? It actually
it's a total
doesn't.
con.
It's a
It's
total con. That's not how it works. And that is so emblematic in the fact that these guys have billions of dollars, infinite amounts of power, and you can see the insecurity. You can see how they still are not feeling like they have enough or that they're safe. They have to control more and more. It's a never ending. I mean, it's such a hand in hand thing with capitalism because there's no end to it. It's just like more, 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 And so you see how the two feed on each other. Like, it's the cancer cell philosophy is
yes,
capitalism, right? There's
yes,
never
yes.
enough. It's just going to never be enough. So I really think it's a deep, I mean, what you're saying about, you're pointing at a deep core of like what we're dealing with as a culture, that we have to be able to see the survival of the nurtured as the reality we're in. And that's going to be even more and more apparent as climate change continues to tip the scales towards there's going to be more migration. I mean, what I've heard people say is that this is people absolutely, these guys know, they might be saying they deny climate change, but they absolutely don't. Like, you think Elon Musk doesn't understand climate change? I mean, he's making electric cars. Like, the man understands what's going on, right? And so you have this extreme protectionism going on, like build walls around the borders, try to grab as much resources as you can, control as much of it as you can, and then this idea that it's almost like we're going into a world of like gangs, like lockdown. Like, we're gonna have this gang over here with all these weapons and as much resources as we can control, and you're gonna have your military and gang over there. It's like a mafia rule, like, and that's like whoever can. It's survival of the fittest. Whoever can duke it out in this like extremely like enhanced Earth, which is going to be, what we're going to be facing. Not like, oh, survival of the nurtured. If we just dealt with the problem of climate change together as a global community, we would all be safer and all be healthier, and we wouldn't have to go into this weird,
Well,
extreme nationalism lockdown.
if you can't if you can't recognize system problems, if you've been told your entire life that it's really your fault, if you're poor, well, that's your fault. If you're sick, it's your fault. And we do that all the time. Here's what you do to prevent yourself from getting cancer, getting MS or whatever, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
um, and just like you're saying with like the school shooting, it's like, no, 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 no. It's the orphan crusher phenomenon
Yes.
is just so ubiquitous on every aspect of our life. It's like, oh, you're fat. Well, that's because you don't
Your
have
problem.
enough,
Yep.
self-discipline. Or if you're,
It's not
you
that
know,
every aisle of every store has just like ungodly amounts of crap in it that doesn't even resemble food. You
and
know what I
that,
mean? Like,
yes,
it's just
yes,
like,
it's
wow. I was walking around the grocery store the other day and I was like, this is remarkable. Really, it
how
really is
much of it's
remarkable
not even food.
how much, I mean, aisle after aisle of things that have no nutritional value whatsoever that are just heavily saturated with packaging. And it's just kind of amazing. Like, you could reduce these stores to 2 aisles of like real food
Right,
and
right.
everything else could just go away. It has nothing
Yes.
to do with food. It's just marketing. It's
I did you
amazing.
ever you never lived in Eugene, right?
I've never lived in Eugene.
The co-op in Eugene, the food co-op in Eugene was called the Growers Market. And it was kind of like you would order once a week and then you would go pick it up. And I
Mm,
think at the time that I was living in Eugene, and you could pretty much get all of your groceries. It's exactly what you're saying,
yeah.
and it was like they got stuff from they sourced stuff from various farmers, and you could get, bulk beans, you could, whatever. But it was like it wasn't that big of a space, and everyone would come in and you get all your groceries, and then it was great. Like,
Yeah.
and like it didn't require a
But
huge.
what this is one example is so good because if you just look at food and survival of the nurtured, right? It's not about nutrition or nurturing or health. It's not about that, right? It's about calories. It's about getting an immediate fix. Like, I walk into that
Mm.
store, I'm
Oh,
exhausted, I'm emotionally something probably, but it's being filtered
versus
into exhaustion. I probably have no idea what I'm actually feeling, but I'm pissed or I'm tired or I'm numb or whatever. I've had a long day and I want what? Sugar and fat, because those are the two things that my nervous system needs
yes.
to like either depress or accelerate, or caffeine. Like, it's drugs. It's just drugs. So you're going into a drugstore really, and like you're looking for your fix. Like, I want fat because I'm running too high and I need to like slow my nervous system down. I need, carbs to like crash. I need sugar to go and caffeine to go up. And there's aisles of that. Like, and it's all really packaged up, really bright, and it's in tons of calories. So when you eat it, you feel immediately the difference. So it's like a fast acting food is an amazing drug. So our bodies are, designed to really react to food almost beyond anything else. And so then you have people, yeah, then you have obesity or fat, or everyone be like, oh, it's a self-discipline problem. Like, you're so messed up.
Right.
Not that the entire culture is designed for this is what you're supposed,
Yes.
this is what you do. And we have a whole thing set up for you. And if you actually want to make a meal, like buy vegetables and go home and cook, well, who has time for, like, we don't structure our
We
society with
don't
that built in.
structure. Right,
Like, yeah,
right.
no one's giving you time to actually have a lunch hour or to have time in the morning to make yourself breakfast, or to have time in the evening, or to have like a nice sit down dinner with your family or your friends. That is not built into America. America's like, you have 5 minutes to do this and 5 seconds to do that and go, go, go. And so it is
And in fact, you should be eating at your desk.
yeah, exactly. And you should be eating while you're working and doing something else. Yeah, multitask for sure. And so then you have people who are stressed, they're pumping cortisol, they have, they gain weight, whatever, all the things. And they're like, yeah, and they come back like, oh, that's a you problem.
That's a you problem. And
And it's because you lack self-discipline, and you need to buy more stuff, either a gym membership so you should work harder even though you're already exhausted, or you should buy these, Ozempic or like whatever drug we have on the market to help, we can take care of that. And so it's just this continual wheel that we're all on. That's just one example, one tiny slice of it. You could take it and put it into anything else, including education, right?
right.
Knocking
Like
my
you,
mic around. Sorry, everybody, if
oh
you
no.
just heard me slap my mic because I'm getting
But
impatient.
yeah, it's like there is no it's the elephant in the room
Yeah.
is that most of the things that cause us stress and harm are systemic
Yes.
issues, because people have been tweaking the system over a long period of time to magnify wealth to the craziest amongst us.
Yeah. And premised on this weird ideology that, you know,
Has been but has been magnified. That
Yes.
ideology is in our lifetime
We're
is
living, I think, at the peak of this idea. Like we're in a moment where we're really, it's very fascinating to be alive right now because we're seeing like the crescendo and collapse of this exact ideology. Like the wave is crested here in
yes.
America. Absolutely, because we have taken this to the extreme, right? America, and unfortunately, America is the megaphone for the world. So it's being blasted back out into the world. Like, this is how you're supposed, this is the attainment. Like, this is what you should be going for, is what we're doing. And I think that is crumbling now. And the entire world is watching it fall
Ugh,
as it is
it's so
completely inherently unsustainable. It is completely inherently insane. And look at the people it produces. Like, if you really just take away any of the rhetoric of like the democracy we're supposed to have, and you look at the raw capitalism that's pulling the levers of this culture and has been the entire time, and it's really exposed right now. This is the moment we're in, the reckoning, right? Like, if you're, unless you're really just blinders on and you really just don't want to see this, because it is unsettling. I give you that. Like, it's easier to not see it for sure, but for those who are willing to see it and who have no choice but to see it because we are in the jaws of it, there is a choice. I mean, that's like, I think what the whole podcast is really about, right? We have options here. This isn't the only thing available to us as humans.
yes, yes, yes.
There
And
is other ways.
yes,
America would say there is no other way because they never show us that. But there is other options. There are other cultures out there living these options on planet Earth. And I think that, you know, it, like, so much of it is about just slowing it down, like slowing it down and trusting that, yeah, we all have a piece of this change within us, and
yes.
it's so hard to believe that when you're always in a crisis. And America's really good at that too. Like, everything has to move fast, everything has to be fixed. There's always someone to blame. There's always a fight. It's like, again, that survival of the fittest mentality of like, well, if I'm not doing well, then it's somebody else's fault. Like, I'm in competition then with another thing. And the philosophy of what needs to be nurtured here, like what's not being nurtured, that we would get to this point. Like, what are we ignoring? What have we starved? Like, what have we starved out of our, human culture right now that's just not getting any love at all? And maybe that's why this is feeling so horrible. Like, that's why this is breaking. And where could we, you know,
I think it's like you've talked about before, like that our infinite being self
mhm.
is like covered up by these layers of society or whatever. And so like that our light is just covered up by like this black goo, and so you
Yeah,
can't
my
your
light
light
bulb
bulb your
philosophy.
light bulb philosophy.
Yep.
I think that all of these what a lot of the systemic problems have in common is that they're they're not acknowledging that it's like the whole idea of like matter and consciousness, and physics is now going, oh my God, like this idea that consciousness comes out of matter
Yeah.
is materialism.
Right.
And now science, like quantum mechanics is like, oh, there
Yeah.
is consciousness and somehow matter is organized consciousness, and consciousness influences everything, and there's no linear time. And like
Yep.
they're having like they've been freaking out for almost 100 years in physics,
Which is what many, many indigenous people have been
which
saying the
is
whole time.
right,
So I
exactly
mean, you
so
get into like, again, I'm taking it back to Peru here, but that's what
saying
that
for
is their
thousands of
spiritual
years.
practice. Yeah, that there
Yes.
is no time, that we are all, we're in this mutual uh past, present, future moment all times. And yet, what interesting thing that they bring forward is that, but we're here in this part of us. Yes, your past, present selves are fully here. The time's an illusion, which is hard for our little brains, linear brains, to think about, but that we are here in the material realm. This is where we can act. Like, this is here where
Yes.
we can do
Yes.
things here. We have the availability to like glean from our past and our futures, both. Um, but right here, right now is like the juice. Like, that's what we came in embodied to enact and to do things in the world. And I think that's
But
really powerful, because it's not like we're we aren't separate from these other realities, but we do have a potency
when we
in
are
this
in
form.
alignment
Yeah.
with this and when we're grounded here.
But
And
it's
that
not all there is. The lie is that this is it. There's nothing
the
else. No,
yes.
what actually it's everything. And then you have this very potent form that you have the ability to do things with, but you are the expression of all the other things that now you can use that wisely. But to just say like this is all there is and there's nothing else is completely to misinterpret the reality that we're in and that you are, like
And
you're
that
so
people
much
are
bigger.
and people are experiencing it all the time, but our
Yes.
society encourages us to set that aside and pretend. And so like when you look
Yes.
at most of the sciences, they're like, biology or whatever, like they don't even talk about consciousness. Okay, that's for the psychologist to work on. Nobody else has to
Ooh,
even think
yeah.
about
Yeah.
consciousness. So right, so there's like that kind of huge shink. And so it's like when
Yeah.
you go from collective kind of like community care as the model for creating your culture, and you want it to be just individual based, then you have to turn a blind eye to all of the things that
Mhm.
actually make life, like think about in the pandemic, like essential
Yeah.
workers, that's all nurture culture stuff. So it's like
Yeah.
we cannot exist without it. It is actually essential, but you devalue it and pretend like
Yeah.
it doesn't exist, and
Right.
or you pretend that it's superfluous. That's my
Yeah.
favorite. It's like
Yeah.
it's not, it's superfluous. Like art is superfluous,
Hmm.
good food
Yeah.
is superfluous. So like
Spirituality is superfluous. Like,
spirituality is
I mean, that's the other piece. Like, right,
floof.
materialism is a part of this conversation. Like that the belief that it's separate somehow. Like this is all there is, and that. And I do. I mean, I believe that if we're gonna have a revolution, and there's gonna have a component of spirituality to it because it's an integration of rehoming the collective idea of who we all are and that we're all connected together. And if you can't,
Yes.
that's a spiritual concept that we're all here together and that we're all supposed to be making this cake. Like we can't do it without each other. There is no one person that's going to make the cake all by themselves and then we all get to eat from it. Like that's not how this works. Like we're all here to do this thing together. And that's the time we're in, which is creating a very unique demand on the American mindset at this time. Like that we have to really, we're not just talking about, what politician or this system, or, that system. It's really an upending of the whole thing being like, we've really just been going at this completely in a completely unsustainable way since the get-go. It was formed as a colony to extract
Well,
resources with slaves and it just and to replace, to displace indigenous people, and it just kept going. It wasn't like there was no stopgap where we took I mean, there was reform along the way, but it's a fascinating moment. I mean, really is. It's like and if you're listening to this or you're part of the conversation, if we don't start talking about, I think, that bigger piece.
and how do we, yeah, like, and how do we, what does it take to to um to start thinking and asking these other questions when the only questions on the table are based on
Who's to
this,
blame? Yeah.
right? Who's to
Yeah.
blame is right now, that's really huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I've been thinking a lot about what is the, how do you the Venn diagram, if it's about who's to blame, there's like there you've got two camps, there's no
Right.
overlap. And
Yep.
so what are the questions that we can ask that can help soften people so that
Yeah.
they can be connected, so that they can have enough safety and
Right.
emotional resiliency that
Yep.
they can look at the big picture in a realistic way.
Well, I think one of the most powerful questions we could ask is what do we want to nurture and what's not being nurtured? Like, I think those are actually really core
Yes,
questions
yes.
and they point you in the right direction. Because if you start asking that question, you step off of survival of the fittest and you step into survival of the nurtured. And you have a different lens on which you're viewing the world. Your reality is shifted. It's a perceptual paradigm shift to survive. If we're going to survive, that's the goal. We'd like to survive. It's not going to be about how many resources I can hoard, or, you know, how much I can push my way forward, or, you know, believing that I have all the answers, or that somebody else has all the answers and I have to give them all my power and support. You know, it is, what isn't being nurtured in me? What isn't being nurtured in my community? You know, what can I nurture? I mean, because nurturing is a private act that can, it's very beautiful, and also it's a public act, right? And it's
Yes.
not about attacking, and it's not, and there's enough nurture to go around. Love is an expansive, abundant thing. It's not, it's the opposite of scarcity, right? And love enhances love. It's one of the principles of abundance. So I just think the paradigm shift we need is to start talking about nurture, and just get off the wheel, you know, because otherwise you're in the tower is falling. Cannot, you know, try to keep picking up the bricks and trying to put the tower back together again. I think that's, for me, for my money, that is the wrong move. Like, I really want to be in the other spiritual realm, and it is spiritual. And I think that if they're, one of the problems we're going to be butting up against is that there still is this materialism, like scientific way of viewing the world, of, you know, anything that brings spirituality into it is dismissed as fluffy or light, or, you know, not important, not real, not hard thinking. And I think, I think that when you talk about emotions and spirituality, it is what makes movements happen. You know, it's a wrong, I think, for the right, or for like the religious right especially, to have a monopoly on spiritual talk, because
Correct.
you have the left over here being like, we're trying to be all rational about it, but our hearts are, you know, we care about things because of a connection to them, and we don't have the language. Like, you go back to Martin Luther King Jr., he was a spiritual leader, you know, I mean, his
Yes.
power was in the spiritual, it was about truth and justice and equality, and but there was a deep core of spirituality there, which we are missing. You know, like we are completely missing. And I think it's important, maybe not again from leadership the way we've seen it in the past, but for all of us as like a grassroots, to
Well,
just
and it
acknowledge that this can be about connecting to each other,
and look what happens
from our hearts.
when people come together. We it's like it's really really difficult to be like, I have this like this spiritual connection to the cosmos. And if you're just by yourself in the society, you start to have this like, am I just making it up? Like,
Right.
what kind of, you know, it's like you can't maintain in isolation this like
You're
belief in
actively mocked too. I mean, it's like, you know, they're,
yes.
you
And
know,
so
dismissed.
I think it does come down to this like being with those who support your being
Mhm.
and singing to each other with your just beingness
Mhm.
gives you the strength to be more and more fully yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the components, if I was going to say, go back to the cake metaphor, which I love, one of the pieces of the cake for me is a spiritual component that's
Yes.
not there, you know, that's like not allowed to be there.
Maybe that should be the butter.
Yeah. Butter. Mm,
Butter's so
everything
good.
tastes better with
Butter
butter.
with butter.
Um,
Unless you're vegan.
unless you're vegan, then it's the coconut oil or whatever. But like,
Olive
yeah,
oil.
I mean, there, that to me is something that isn't being nurtured. That's like,
Yes.
that's an unnurtured space, is to how to have like connection to your own spirit, and to honor the spirit of life in everything, and that it's sacred. Like, this river is sacred. That is a statement, right? And that statement would not allow you to pour poison into it. Like,
Yes.
that's the, not just like, oh, so many parts per, you know, because this has been, we have to do 3 studies about whether this causes cancer in this fish before we can say that you can only pour this much poison into the orphan crushing machine, right? Like, then we're in the, if we don't bring any, like, the paradigm shift of like, yeah, this, why, you know, this river is sacred. There is no amount of poison that we should be putting into it. Like, what's wrong with us? What we haven't, what's not nurtured in our community, that we don't have a solution for this pollution problem that doesn't involve pouring into a river. You know what I mean? The complete paradigm changes when you start asking the right questions. And some of
Yes.
that does involve like on the Japan, like, we don't do this on principle. Like, we just don't do this. And that's like an inward shift of like, yeah, that's not the people we are. Like that would be shameful. That
Yes.
would be
And
wrong.
so,
So we don't care if you leave the alcohol in the street. We're not going to steal it because we don't do that. Like that is where we have to get, like, we don't care how easy it is to buy plastic. We won't buy it because we don't want to see it in the ocean, right? Like we care about the health of the nurture of everything
and
because that's
so,
how I survive. And you can bring it right back to individualism. Like that's how I'm safe. That's how I survive. That's how the future exists, is that we nurture, and so we survive of the nurtured, right? Like that's where it goes
and
to.
so I would say that I'm just thinking about the people that are lonesome and who don't, it's like all this stuff is scary, right? So you can't, it's hard to like in a work environment, you're not able to like it's like how do we how do we help people to connect to each other? And I
Mhm.
think that if you have connections in your life, I think cultivating those, I think for the Gestalt, if we're going to talk spirituality, I do feel like that energetically uplifts and makes it easier for others to form relationships.
And I want to say, like, connection to anything, and doesn't need to be other people. Like it could be a plant or a tree. I mean, I really
Yes.
do think that connection is connection, and loneliness is a product of the mindset that we've been raised in. Loneliness doesn't even
Yes.
exist, right? Loneliness only exists if you believe in that you're alone and separate in a material world where, X, Y, and Z. But the premise of interconnectedness, you're never
It
alone. It's
changes.
impossible. Like you are,
They're teaming trillions
I mean, you're
of
just
like,
like,
yeah.
but like, I mean, like you have this whole other, like you're just the physical form of this huge
Yes.
being that you are past, present, future. You've got all that company, and you've got the energetics of just the whole
The
thing you're
living
connected
worlds,
to. And
the
so if you're just
planet.
yeah, you're here as an expression of love, but there's no loneliness in that. I mean, it's
So,
just, I mean, I'm not saying you can't feel it or haven't felt it, but if you're in the right framework of thinking about your reality, which is all just made up, y'all, we're all just making this up in our heads. Choose the reality where loneliness isn't even a concept, because nothing's separate from anything else. And I'm not saying we all have me and Iris don't have any answers. We're just kicking the can around. But I also want to just add one more piece of this that's really powerful for me, and I think this is maybe my next chapter that I'm going to focus more energy on, is that we need the mythos and the stories and the future vision out there too, because nurture culture as a concept, you got this whole development on the other side of like the stories about it, the myths that go with it, the movies, the books, and the future projection of this dystopian kind of future, which we've already talked about, is all fully fleshed out on this side. So it's really easy to buy into it mentally. And there's like this real thin material over here for this other concept. It's in indigenous cultures, but we're not given those. I mean, we're not often given that wisdom or teachings, right? But I think, for my money, is if you really want to create like a culture, the stories and the imagery of especially the future visioning, like what we're going for, what it could look like if we were in this culture, what would it look like if we were operating from a different paradigm? How would it
and that, I
feel?
mean, and that's, like when I do collaborative installations, that's a question I've been asking, having people ask in multiple different ways
Yeah,
in different
yeah.
installations. And I think it's super, super powerful.
It's
And
powerful
and I'm
and
just
challenging.
challenging, but also it's really powerful to ask, to try to think about and feel into that positive
Yeah.
future, and to know that other people have done it too really amplifies it. So like
Yes.
when we come together, we amplify those things so much. And so I do think that's like, just I feel like I can see the purse string to tighten
Yeah.
all of this up. And that is that creating, connecting, creating amplifies the love that we are we are a manifestation of. And it pulls us towards that positive vision, and it permissions other people to be able to believe in it.
Yeah.
And I think I was thinking about when we met each other, we met at Lunasa, at
That's
the
right.
Lunasa Festival. And when I first started talking to people about it, I was like, I want to do a bread festival. I want to celebrate this holiday. And I had this like huge dropped in my lap in my head vision for how it's going to go. Many people, when I was trying to like explain it to them, there was nothing to stick it to in their brain.
Right.
Certain people, when I kind of described it, they were like, "Oh, so in." Like the dude in charge of the food bank was like immediately, and he's like, "I don't have any time. I'm going to come to every meeting. We have to do this." Like,
Mm,
and he totally got it. And there were a few other people. So like we had this little core of people, and but then when it came into fruition and it happened,
yeah.
it was such a like it was like it was such a huge heart event,
Yeah, it was.
you
It's
know?
beautiful.
And
Yeah.
like there were like 2,000 people came, and like there was there were like 100 volunteers, and like there was dancing and music and like all the
Hmm.
things that happened. And I think that the repercussions for that lasted a long time. We only did three of
Yeah.
them. And like the number, I think it's four people told me that they literally moved to Astoria because they happened upon it. And
Nice.
they're like, if
Yeah.
this exists here, I want this to exist here. And so I just feel like that was just like this one little tiny, like, and it was big, but it was also, it's like,
It's a
we live,
powerful
it's
example of how this
powerful.
works. Yeah. Like you have a vision and it's dropped in your lap from spirit, right? It comes through and then other people are drawn to it. And I think this is really key that you don't have to go force people to, the people who are drawn step up. They're like,
Work with them.
yeah,
Yes.
work with them. Don't waste your energy trying to convince other people that this is great. Like put it out there to the people, and the people who step up and are like ready and understand it, grab them and be like, cool, let's do it. And then do the thing because it is magical. Like it's being dropped in your lap, not because of you, but because
Correct.
you're the channel, you're the perfect, you know, you are
The
the piece, the ingredient, you're the ingredient that the cake will be made from, right? You won't do it alone, but you're like the one that it's coming through. And if you trust it and you do it, oh man, that's where you inspire. People see that little chunk of this is what's possible. And we can take one little step further towards the future timeline of nurture culture where we're all, we are in the survival of the nurtured and the earth is beautiful, healing, whole, and we're all in abundance, right? I believe that's out there already. Like that future already exists. I had this is gonna sound really woo, but the other night I was it was the lunar eclipse and I was doing a meditation about future timelines, which I like to do. And I had this really strong vision of a future version of myself putting her hand out like towards me.
Oh.
And and in physical reality, I put my hand out towards this vision and I felt our hands touch, like her from the future to me sitting in my room meditating, and it was so powerful. I really do believe that there are future versions of ourselves where all of this is already done and that they're encouraging us. Like they're the ones sending the Lunasa
Mm.
idea. Your future Iris sent that to you. Like I think that's where they're coming from. It's like, do this. This is going to be good, and you never know what kind of magic will brew up from it. You don't need to know. You just have to do the thing, start the farmer's
You
market.
don't need to know. You don't have to, and you
Yeah.
don't even have to have it all figured
You
out,
don't have to have it all figured out. You just have
because
to make a move and it's fun. It's usually something
it's
that
really
will
fun.
feel really fun and creative and
Yeah.
like it's for you. It's not just a sacrifice for other people. It's actually part of your light. This is how you shine your light, right? So it's part of your light bulb. So the cool thing about nurture culture and what we're talking about is it's like about you being more authentically weird and you. And believe it or not, the culture tells us we should all be less of that and more like this other little box they want to put us
The
in.
irony, the irony.
The irony is that's not actually true. And the more we are our weird selves and follow our weird impulses, the happier we are and the more the
Yeah.
culture heals, right?
Oh
So,
my gosh, I'm getting all sleepy.
oh, I just knocked Iris out. We did a long one, but it was the end of the season.
We did a whole year
A
together.
whole year
We
of
said
this.
we were going to do this. And we did it. I
We
feel
did
like
it.
I'm proud of us.
I am proud. And here's an example right in the making that we said we were going to do a podcast, and we just did it. And we don't know what we're doing. I have no idea how to do a podcast. We certainly didn't know if anybody was going to listen to it at all. And we just did it. And hopefully it's inspiring people. And people are, I have people tell me all the time that they were sad and then they listened to the podcast and it cheered them up or made them
Oh,
feel connected or
nice.
yeah. Give us your feedback. I know the people I bump into in person, but it really does help if you get something to send us a little note, keep us going. But I do think going forward, the podcast might look a little different for season 2. We might shift their gears a little bit. Still be a lot of the nurture culture, but I'm kind of interested in exploring this idea of future potentiality and like fleshing that out a little bit,
Nice. Yeah.
like what it could look like if we had nurture culture healthcare or nurture culture food systems or nurture, like
And
just
then
kind of,
been talking to some people
yeah, who are doing it,
who are
parts of
doing it right
yeah,
now because it is all happening right now. There's people doing good things
everything's happening at once.
everywhere. I mean,
Yes,
like, yeah, like even in this time space,
yes. And
not
I did
just,
I did buy the website nurturenation.org. I
oh,
got the
nice.
domain. So I am intending to build out a website of nurture culture stuff in the coming year as I travel the world. So that'll also start to look different as a podcast because I will not be having
In one
conversations
place.
from Oregon. I will be having conversations from multiple different cultures, which will be really fun too. So anyway, thanks for listening, you guys. It's been a year. Happy Equinox.
We love
Iris has to go to bed now because it's after 7:00.
It's true. I wake up really early.
I know you do. You're so cute. All right. I love
I love
you.
you too.